Welcome to Exus the Podquest. This is going to be a fantastic day. We are going to be doing an incredible interview with none other than Mary Jane Rubenstein. All right, and we're talking about pantheism, panentheism, and a bunch of other pans out there. Before I get into it and introduce her, I'm going to do our quote of the day, like I always do. There's actually going to be two of them because it's a special day, right? And here we go. The whole story of the universe is implicit in any part of it. The meditative eye can look through any single object and see, as through a window, the entire cosmos. Make the smell of roast duck in an old kitchen diaphanous, and you will have a glimpse of everything, from the spiral nebulae to Mozart's music and the stigmata of St. Francis of Assisi. That's by Aldous Huxley. What an incredible quote. The next one's a little bit closer, tighter on our subject today, which again is pantheism. And here's the quote. Everything is interwoven, and the web is holy. Marcus Aurelius. All right, we are going to be, again, we're talking with Mary Jane Rubenstein today. Mary Jane Rubenstein is a scholar who specializes in religion, philosophy, science studies, and gender studies. She's a professor of religion and science and society at Wesleyan University and is affiliated with the philosophy department and the feminist gender and sexuality studies program there. She holds a BA from Williams College, a master's in philosophy from the University of Cambridge, and a PhD from Columbia University. Wow. She's also a fellow of the International Society for Science and Religion, and she's the author of several books. I'm not going to give you all the publications because there's just too many. We'd be here all day just on the intro. All right. But she did write Astrotopia, the Dangerous Religion of the Corporate Space Race in 2022. Also, Image, Three Inquiries in Technology and Imagination with Thomas A. Carlson and Mark Taylor in 2021. And Pantheology's Gods, Worlds, and Monsters in 2021. You've got to check these books out. Pantheology's a word that she made up. Just love it. That's outstanding. Again, also published numerous other articles, has done tons of interviews, and I'm so excited to welcome her to the show. Mary Jane Rubenstein, welcome to Exus the Podquest.
Thank you so much, Brian. It's great to be here.
Thank you. I really am super excited to talk to you about pantheism and panentheism, all the other panisms that we can get to. And so let's just dive right in. Pantheism, starting there, the biggest topic. Let's give a little definition. What are we talking about there? What is pantheism?
Okay, so most simply said, pantheism is the idea that the universe is itself divine. That the word that we usually call God isn't something other than the material world. It's just that the whole thing is God, and God is everywhere. Divinity is everywhere, suffused in the cosmos. There are lots of different ways of getting at that, ways of talking about it. Some of them are in conflict with one another, but that's the big idea.
So it would include the entire cosmos, not just like the natural world that we live in, correct?
The broadest definition would be that it would be the universe, right? All that is.
Okay.
All that is.
Great. And the term pantheism, I've seen a number of different areas or a number of different claims to its origin. I know in a previous YouTube that you mentioned Spinoza, Baruch Spinoza, as a philosopher that came up with the term. But I've also seen and from, I think it's, pantheism.com, they attribute it to Joseph Raphson, an English mathematician in 1697. And then there's some claims about a deist named John Toland. Also, what do you think the bottom line is on that and where it originated from?
Yeah, I'm going to say that the best we can do is Toland. It was Toland who, as far as I can trace back, coined the term, but coined it in relation to particularly Baruch Spinoza, whom he thought had some really bizarre and disgusting ideas about the universe. So it was actually coined not so much as a positive statement, I am a pantheist and these are my ideas and I think everything is divine. It was coined as a nasty thing to call somebody, and in particular, a nasty thing to call Baruch Spinoza and the kinds of philosophies sounded like.
Gotcha. And as you're saying that, and I didn't think about it before, but it kind of strikes me a little bit similar to the term the Big Bang Theory, which I believe was also kind of a derisive term when it first came out. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was that was Fred Hoyle in the 20th century who said, who had a different idea about an eternal universe. And he said, my eternal universe makes a lot more sense than this ridiculous idea that there was, a tiny infinite particle of something that exploded and made some big bang. Fun of it, and then that took off. Yeah, so it's one of those terms like Obamacare, for example, was a nasty thing to call Obama's plan. And rather than saying like it's not Obamacare, Obama's people were like, okay, let's call it Obamacare, and right took it up and made it a positive position. It's got that kind of feel to it.
So yeah, you got the same thing with pantheism, where you're almost giving a critical view of it, but that name kind of stuck, and that's where it was. But from what I understand, the thought and the ideas and concepts behind pantheism really have an ancient origin. They trace themselves all the way back. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. And they, so, the term is coined in a European intellectual context, 16th century, 17th century. Um, but the ideas that go into it can be found certainly in that European heritage, in ancient Greek ideas that date back 2,500 years, in ancient Chinese philosophies, certainly ancient Buddhist and Indian philosophies. So they come from all over the place. But then, it's in part um, a worry in early modern Europe that these non-European ideas, like the ones that had taken root in India and China, were having too much influence on Europe, that produced a kind of panic that then coined this term pantheism. But yeah, the idea was all over the place, including in ancient Greece and Rome.
Okay, yeah, that's what my understanding was, that too. But it did also, I saw like the Chinese, the Taoist concepts, some of the Taoist stuff, the Upanishads. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing that right, but the Indian Vedic text perhaps that would also be there. And yeah, I didn't know the interplay between that and maybe the some of the Greek underpinnings as well.
Well, certainly in the ancient world, it does seem like people have hypothesized that there may have been some exchange between, the earliest ideas that we now call Buddhist, and even, very ancient pre-Socratic philosophers. That's totally possible. It's also possible a lot of these ideas they may all be pantheist of some flavor, but they're different from one another. They say different things. They come up in different ways. It's not absurd to think that different people could have come up with these different ideas, but it's certainly the increasingly intense exchange of trade, of materials, of goods, of people, and of ideas in the 15th to like 18th century, that provokes, again, a particular kind of anxiety in Europe about the quality of its philosophy, and the influence of it, and what feels like a kind of foreign incursion.
Interesting. And I've been looking at a whole bunch of things, of course, but one of them is monism, the concept of monism, and I don't know if that really has a relationship to pantheism. I wanted to ask you about that because it seems to, I don't see the exact connection, but I can kind of, I don't know, intellectualize a connection there. You got everything is all just one thing in monism, and then pantheism is all everything is one God. How is there a connection there? Is there some kind of a thing?
Yeah, so to my mind, there are a lot of flavors of pantheism, and one flavor is this idea of monism, the idea that all things are one thing. We find that in the Vedanta and ancient Indian teachings, that kind of come through the Upanishads, as you said. Yeah, this is the idea that everything is one, that if you kind of pierce the veil of reality that makes it look like we're all different, ultimately everything is totally unified. This is certainly again, a flavor of pantheism. There are also dualist pantheist ideas. Taoism, for example, gives you, two principles. Some forms of Stoicism give you two principles. And then there are some more kind of pluralistic pantheist ideas that affirm that everything is divine in some way. But that doesn't mean that everything is one or that everything is fundamentally two. Everything is a whole bunch of different things. And that actually seems to come through in that Aurelius quotation with, everything is interwoven. That doesn't mean that everything is one. It means that everything is interwoven. So that's a more pluralist way. So I think that, right, we can think about pantheism as coming in monist forms. Everything is the same. Dualist forms, everything is like one of two things interacting, or these pluralist forms, like everything is a whole bunch of things at the the same time that doesn't quite add up to one or two or three, right? The sort of plurality goes all the way out and all the way down.
Wow, cool. Very cool. And as I'm hearing you talking and mentioning monism, and I pronounced it monism, I'm finding that as I'm doing this podquest, that I'm pronouncing all sorts of things wrong. So I'm really happy you've pointed that out, or
No,
that you said that.
I'm glad you translated for me because I'm glad I knew what it was. I was like, oh no, what's monism? Do we worship mana? Like,
Monism. Yeah, right. I'm stumbling over the wrong word. Okay, well, great, thank you. So you mentioned flavors of pantheism and different things. Are there religions that are very similar to or that are adopt the pantheist idea?
okay, so this is where it gets a little funky because there are very few, apart from, some New Age traditions,
Hmm.
there are very few traditions that will say, we are pantheist. And I
Hmm.
think that this has to do with the nasty coinage of the term, which associated pantheism with everything that was stupid and feminine and childish and lazy in philosophy. So there are very few philosophies that will say we are pantheist. That having been said, if you say that at minimum a pantheist position asserts what we call immanence of divinity. Divinity is in the world. It's right there. It doesn't exist in some other sphere. It's not like disembodied force somewhere out, but like the immanence of divinity. Yeah, then there are all kinds of traditions that assert that. Ancient Greek Stoicism. So Marcus Aurelius is a Roman Stoic, but the Greek Stoic tradition before him had this idea that the divine principle was totally interwoven with the material universe and was itself a kind of materiality, like a breath, basically, that and kind of tension force that suffused everything. Again, there are pantheist strands, very strong ones in the Vedantic tradition that we now call part of Hinduism, in a number of Buddhist traditions, in Taoist traditions, and I even think that there are some pantheist inclining forms of Christianity, but they would certainly never admit to this.
Right, yeah. As I was looking at pantheism more in great depth in preparation for this, it seemed like, and maybe I'll just phrase it in the form of a question. Is it fair to say that pantheism is more of a feature of other religions, than it is its own separate religion, although there is that element as well? Is that fair?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can join, some pantheist societies that are like, we are pantheist.
Right.
But what you'll find there is that they're borrowing from a whole bunch of different traditions in order to, find orientation in the world. It is much more, you're right, it is much more a philosophical position, right? Like a statement of what divinity is and where it can be found, that then gets, can be found in all of these different traditions. And part of the thing that I tried to argue in this book that I wrote about pantheism is that it doesn't just show up in what we call religions. It's also increasingly showing up in a number of the natural sciences that are ascribing the qualities of what's traditionally called divinity to the natural world itself. Right? They're
Mhm.
cosmologists, they're biologists, they're geologists, who are attributing all these traditionally divine features of the universe: creation, redemption, sustenance, recycling, destruction, and remaking, to the universe itself. And in that sense, they can also be said to be pantheist positions, again, even though they wouldn't want to say this. So part of what's kind of fun about studying this weird term is that nobody really wants to avow it, but it shows up everywhere.
Right. It's in from pantheism.net, I found a chart or something. I'm looking at it on my notes. And this traces back to 2016. They took kind of a survey around the world of how many pantheists there are. Okay. And they came up with a total of 7,766. It's not very many pantheists. Of course, now it did not include the United States. It didn't include a whole lot of other countries. But I think the point there, and they go through and break it down by I mean, there are 60 in Scotland. Okay, so I don't know how they found the 60. I mean, it's whatever. But I think that if you include all of the religions, it seems to me you include all the religions and all the like you mentioned earlier, New Age groups, etc. If you include all those religions that have that pantheistic tilt to it, there'd be an enormous number more than that. Am I right?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think that the question of who identifies themselves as a
Yeah.
pantheist is at least it's not the most pressing one. And what I've found is that, when I give lectures about this stuff, and where it comes up and what the worldview looks like, I'll have people come up to me and say, like, you know what, I think I'm a pantheist, but they wouldn't have identified themselves that way. And it's not clear to me that the term is all that important as a means of identifying one's worldview. I think it's a helpful term um, to serve as a way of diagnosing the Western intellectual and political tradition with some fears that it has about itself and about its control over things, and B, as a kind of like as like a rallying point for positions that might be very different from one another, but that might have the same kind of ethical sensibilities. Like ultimately, the thing that I find promising about pantheism is the ethical possibilities that it produces. And I think that you can find all kinds of agreement about the way to treat the earth, the universe, the space in between the earth and the rest of the universe, and all the beings that live in it. Um, you can find those resonances among people who have these kinds of pantheist flavored positions without asking that everybody sign up for the same philosophy or sign up for the same religion or sign up for the right. So I think that's where its power lies.
Very cool. But let me kind of trace a little bit back to the theology piece of it. You have, everything being ascribed to, in the universe is God. What do you say to somebody who says, well, okay, even if that's the case, then it kind of somewhat cancels out the concept of God in that it's like, it takes some of the mystery and well, certainly the extra dimension out of it, and so it's not like, because a lot of people are looking for in a religion, they're looking for something that they can say that's better or greater than themselves, and here is that an objection to pantheism that it really doesn't have that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's an objection to pantheism.
Hmm.
Certainly if you have a commitment to or an investment in a a single or multiple disembodied divinities who are different, fundamentally different from the world that they create or oversee or something like that, um, then like pantheism's not for you. It's just not, it's
Right.
not, it's not the position that will be particularly attractive. Um, the but and in fact, there's some people who make this point in a very funny way. Arthur Schopenhauer, for example, says, when you call everything God, then kind of nothing is God. Like if the whole world is divine, then the whole world is just the world and nothing is divine. So pantheism doesn't actually mean anything. It's just a kind of way of dressing up atheism, right? Why not just say there's no such thing as God? Why say, like, what pantheism basically says is there's no such thing as that God that you usually talk about, dad in the sky who oversees all things. What there is the universe. But that thing is divine. Schopenhauer's like, come on, that's ridiculous. Don't call it divine. Just say it's the world and be a little more honest with yourself. But I do think that there is, again, like a practical ethical difference between seeing the universe as just a given, right? Just a kind of it's just the universe. Things are just things on the one hand, and seeing them all, interwoven and infused, as Huxley and Aurelius were saying, and all kind of carrying together a sacred energy. That's just a different way of relating to the world. But ultimately, I mean, it's I think the big question I think you're getting at is like, is there ultimately a difference between pantheism and atheism? Is pantheism just like atheism with some glitter on or something like that. I don't know that that is a question that I can answer. I think it is very different for some people. And the positions feel very different to some people, and the positions don't feel at all different to others.
Yeah, that quote by that you or that yeah, the quote by Schopenhauer that you mentioned, it reminds me of something also that Carl Sagan said, a similar quote. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it's kind of like, and if you kind of put all that together and you bring it from the religious person, the traditional religious person's point of view, it's kind of like, well, look, you're taking you're taking the fun out of this for us. You got the everything is God. Where's the fun part? Where's the good part where it's like something greater than that, or something, that's more mysterious, or something along those lines? But, at the same time, I get your point, which is if you take a look at it and like, Huxley and bringing Marcus Aurelius together, it's holy in itself. So you can kind of draw that conclusion as well. The universe has got its, magnificence and grandeur to itself.
Magnificence, grandeur, and mystery. I mean,
Yeah.
Hagen would be the first to say, the more we find out about the universe, the less we know about the universe. We have absolutely no idea. I mean, the Big Bang, we thought we had it all hammered out. Now it turns out that the timing might all be wrong. The like timeline might all be wrong. If it turns out dark energy is a thing and dark matter are actually things, then it turns out that insofar as we don't know anything about dark matter or dark energy, we don't actually know anything about 96% of the universe, because right, only 4% of it matter. Right. So it's not like oh wow, we figured this world out, like it would be really nice to have some mystery. I mean, there's mystery absolutely everywhere. There's mystery in the way that a leaf unfolds. There's mystery in the way that an acorn contains an oak tree. And so people who tend to uh, gravitate toward the pantheist tradition, I think, instead of looking for mystery in some other sphere, look for it right here, sort of go down to find their mystery, right in the depths of the place that we already are.
Yeah, picking up from that, I mean, there are so many things. Like, the more we know we don't know, and the mysteries keep going. There is a quote out there. I can't find it to save my life, but it's about how if you drill down to the center of the universe, and the core of what the universe is, it's much more mysterious than we have any idea about. So, and I guess that does have that flavor that even if you're a religious person, you can take and say, hey, maybe pantheism holds that kind of attractiveness to it because it's got that mystery, it's got the grandeur, the awe, all of it.
Right. And I think that the most interesting theisms, the most interesting theistic traditions that do affirm a transcendent creator, a creator outside the universe, who also oversees it, um, will also affirm that insofar as the universe has been created by this, you know, uh, mysterious, transcendent being, power, force, the universe, bears that mystery within it, right? And the way that you find your way to that creator, to that divinity, is, through the mystery of the world itself. Those seem to me at least, to be the most interesting theisms. And I don't think that there's any reason to, oppose those kinds of theologies that have a transcendent creator to pantheism, right? Because they have those pantheist moments, those ideas that like the complexity and wonder of divinity is somehow folded into the universe itself. Again, to my mind, the most important question is like, where do you look and what are you invested in? And if you've got the kind of theological position that says that the only important thing is something outside the universe, um, then I think you're missing everything. But if your theological position says that everything in the universe is worthy of care and respect, then at that point, it doesn't really matter to me whether, you say it's, because that stuff is divine, or because that stuff's been created by a divinity, or because that stuff is suffused with divinity. These are all different philosophical positions, but practically, ethically, I don't think it matters all that much. The big practical ethical question is like, where do you put your energy, and where do you put your care?
Yeah, and I've in preparing for the interview, I've watched a number of all of your YouTube video, both all of the interviews and the keynote speaking, and that does come through very very clearly for me. For you is the morality of things, and how people are going to treat the world we live in and our experience of it going forward. And I think that's really cool. So, and from what I'm taking out of that, it's like, pantheism, or maybe even, even if you're drawing from outside of pantheism, as long as you're having that element of care and morality and kind of custodianship feeling, then you're really good with that.
Yeah, I think that the this funny term pantheism and like the weird history that it's had can be instructive for those of us who are looking to find ways to care for the Earth, the solar system, right, as we're exploring more, right, to be good stewards of the universe beyond us. Um, but that doesn't mean that, again, that doesn't mean that everybody has to be a pantheist. I'm not even sure that I would know what it means. Apparently, there are only 7,000 people who say that they're a pantheist. So it's not even clear what you mean, right? But there are things that you can learn from this position about how to be attentive, about how to be caring, about how to see wondrous and mysterious things all around you that could honestly fit into kind of any commitments that you have. It's for me a way of like reattuning oneself to what is important in whatever one's world is.
All right, we're going to pick up now with the second half of our interview with Mary Jane Rubenstein on pantheism, panentheism, and all the other isms. We're going to get into a lot of that right now. All right, let's talk about pantheism and science. Start with, like, you mentioned a bit of it in our first half about about science, the Big Bang, and that sort of thing. What do pantheists believe about the origin of the universe?
Well, again, there isn't like a very coherent group of pantheists you could ask about the origins of the universe. But a there are a lot of accounts of the origins of the universe that you can call pantheist. One of them is the ancient Greek idea that the universe is born in fire. This is a Stoic idea. The universe is born in fire. It lives for a while. And then it uses up all of its moisture, and eventually the sun kind of sets it on fire, and the whole thing burns and comes to nothing but ash and like a little bit of moisture. And then, like a phoenix, that little moisture and the ash kind of interact to make a whole new world, and it lives again. And then that just happens over and over again. That is an entirely, again, what we would call immanent account of creation, of how the world is made. The world makes itself over and over and over again. So we could call that pantheist because it's like a self-making world. Um, who the for if we go all the way to the early 20th century, what people like Einstein believed until really the 50s. I mean, really the 1960s, but what Einstein certainly believed until about the 1940s was that the universe was just eternal, that it just had always been here. It had always been as it was until the late 1920s. Scientists really didn't know how big the universe was, so it seemed just to be about the size of the Milky Way, and it was just there. And the reason that scientists preferred this idea that the universe was just eternal and not created was that the minute you say that it's been created, you have to ask, like, well, by whom? Who creates it, or what creates it? And this is a question that lies outside the sort of purview of the natural sciences. So cosmologists would just say, well, the universe just is. So the Big Bang hypothesis was a real problem because the person who first actually generated the idea, he was actually a Jesuit priest in addition to being a physicist. He realized, well, Edward Hubble realized the universe was expanding. So the universe is expanding now, then that means maybe it's always been expanding. And if it's always been expanding, then that means that if you go back in time, it was smaller. And if you go back in time, it was smaller than that. And if you go back in time, it was smaller than that. And you play the tape backward and you see the universe getting smaller and smaller and smaller. If you keep going, this guy says, Georges Lemaitre, you'll get to a point where the whole universe is contained in one point. So maybe, he said, applying Einstein's field equations to the thought experiment he was doing, maybe the universe began as like a hyper dense, like infinitely dense particle that he called a primeval atom that somehow like just blew up, exploded, and the universe came firing forth out of this tiny little particle. Einstein infamously hated this idea when he heard of it for the first time, and he said, "No, please don't tell me that. Like, don't say that that's the way the world began, because that sounds too much like Genesis." That sounds too much like a God creating out of nothing or almost nothing everything. And yet, in 1965, it turns out that seems to be the way that things go. It seems like our best idea is the universe started in a very small and very dense state, and then kind of ballooned outward. So a pantheist understanding of that would look something like uh, that like the universe is self-created, that happened according to fundamental quantum processes or something like that. But you could also give a theistic understanding of that and say, God, some extra cosmic God, created a little particle and blew it up and made the universe that way. So there are always different ways of interpreting the same kind of scientific data.
Yeah, the kind of description you said about Stoicism and that story where it kind of starts real small and then gets out and then goes and kind of in a cyclical pattern reminds me a little bit of like the big bounce theory that's out there, and so that there be kind of this eternal big bang and then it goes out and comes back in and the same kind of thing or a big crunch at some point. So that's very, very fascinating that those kind of concepts are kind of Stoicism from a long time ago, and then current Big Bang cosmology and that sort of thing now, similar to what you also said, which is the Einstein's objection to the Big Bang theory originally, and he doesn't like it because it's too Genesis-like. And so I had a show on, that we did previously where I was like, where did the people in the Bible come up with the idea that is so similar to what we have now? But anyway, I know that's getting a little bit off the pantheistic
Well,
trail, but I found it interesting.
I can say really quickly that the amount of data we have always increases, right? And the amount of like little things that we learn is always increasing. But I think that the number of kinds of stories we have to tell about that data are pretty few in number. Like there aren't a ton. Right. So either because we don't have ways yet of making up the new stories that account for this data. So you end up seeing the same kinds of stories over and over again. You see the Stoic story, you see the Epicurean story about an infinity of universes, you see the Genesis story, you see stories about animals creating the cosmos out of diving and things like that. Those things just kind of come up because I think we're kind of narratively not impoverished, but narratively cyclical. Right? We bring up the same stories over and over again to account for new data.
Yeah, interesting, fascinating. In fact, I'm going to switch gears a little bit. There's this, and I know you've talked about this in other interviews about the fine tuning point, and that just very briefly for the audience is that if you look at all the various constants and laws of the universe, they appear to be fine-tuned, like really calibrated to give rise to life, such that if even a little bit of adjustment was made to any of these, critical laws or constants of the universe, there'd be no life at all. All right? From a pantheistic point of view, how does that square? I mean, is that like just the nature of the beast?
Well, okay, let's start with the theistic point of view.
Okay.
The theistic answer to the so-called fine-tuning problem. I'm not sure it's a problem, but if it's a problem, um, the problem would be something like how is it possible that gravity has the precise value that it has when any other value of gravity would cause, the Earth to tumble into the sun, or would cause the universe not even to be able to inflate, right? Not even just life to exist, but like anything to exist. If any of these constants were, if the weak nuclear force were any stronger, if the strong nuclear force were any weaker, if the electron were any bigger, if the blah, 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 how do they all have these precise values that they have to have for anything to exist at all? The theistic answer is God. That's
Yeah.
how God did it. God is sitting there. God's like a cosmic mix master who's like, okay, we're gonna add this much gravity and this much cosmological constant, and that this is we're gonna fine tune the. It's God. Very easy answer. Um, in order to get around God, there are a couple of things you can do. You can give, I think, like that what you might call the Schopenhauer answer, the atheist answer is like, it's just the way it is. It's just it. The universe just is, and it doesn't admit of the question why. It's just the way it is, and in fact, our wonder at any other possibility is sort of specious. It doesn't make any sense. There aren't any other possibilities. This is just the way the universe is. So it doesn't make a ton of sense to ask how it could have been other. So that's one kind of like That's one sort of answer. One very pantheist-leaning, very different answer is that universes get created all the time. We don't live in a universe, just a universe. We live in a multiverse, and that multiverse creates and generates universes throughout an eternity. And that some universes are born with a lot of gravity, and some universes are born with a little gravity, and some have too much, and some have too little, and some are just right. And the ones that don't work. And the ones that do work. And the reason that we're able to ask why this universe worked is that we happen to be in one that worked. But it's not because there's some extra cosmic God. It's because universes get like tried out all the time. And we, again, happen to be in one that works. So that's an imminent way. Again, not transcendent, imminent way of explaining how the universe could come to be, because there's like a wider metaverse or multiverse that generates a whole bunch of them. And then like one of them turns out, yeah, I don't know. I just learned that apparently in the Caribbean, sea turtles, for every 1,000 eggs that get laid, about one of them is going to survive. Universes might be like sea turtles.
And if that is the case, then would it be fair to say that pantheism would embrace all of the multiverse as God, as opposed to just the universe that we currently live in?
Yeah, right, exactly. So there are some pantheisms that just talk about, the earth as divine, and then the more, then some of the more expansive ones talk about the universe as divine. The most expansive kind of pantheism would say, no, the multiverse is in fact the compendium of all divine things, and it is the multiverse that generates the principles that we need to generate universes, that generate the principles we need to develop galaxies and solar systems and planets and things like that. But that doesn't mean that the multiverse as such is de facto pantheist, right? There are theistic ways to talk about them. You could just say that God created the multiverse. There's nothing to prevent you from saying that if you wanted to say that, right? So yes, the multiverse does lend itself to pantheistic interpretation. But if you wanna say God created the multiverse, you can always do that.
Yeah, and I've heard that that point a couple of times, especially in an interview you had previously, which is, yeah, you could just say, well, God created the multiverse then, so you can go that route, or you could say that like you said, it's just the way it is, and we happen to live in one that's life-giving, if you will. And I really want to get on to simulation theory and holographic theory, but I'm going to come back to that only because we're going to run out of time if I do that, and I really want to get to what I had mentioned before, which is the other pans, okay? And maybe we'll come back to the other stuff later. The difference between these, because it's confusing to some people, pantheism versus, let's say, panentheism. If you will, let us know, what is the difference between those two terms?
Okay, so for pantheism, the universe is divine. That's the broadest explanation we've got, right? Broadest definition we've got. For panentheism, the universe sort of houses and contains God, and God houses and contains the universe, but they're not the same thing. There is God and there is the universe, and they are intertwined in very complex, kind of mutually indwelling ways, but there are still two different things, God and universe.
Okay.
Right? So that N means in. So if Pantheos means all is God, right? Panentheos means all is in God and God is in all.
Okay. What about pandeism? How does that distinguish itself from pantheism or panentheism?
Not great on pandeism. I think the idea is more that God creates the world kind of sorry, we're gonna have to edit a little bit of this. That God creates the world in such a way that the world sort of shows forth what God is, but then doesn't have like an active relationship to that world. The panentheistic God is totally involved with all of the comings and goings of the world, and tries at every moment to kind of lure humanity toward good options and away from bad ones. The pandeist God doesn't have these like small interactions with the universe.
Yeah, in looking at pandeism, it struck me that it was kind of like this, God created the universe by getting rid of himself. So like he was part of it, he started it, and then just let, the universe become basically what he is. It kind of reminded me of a book by Scott Adams. I don't know if you've heard of this. It's called God's Debris. You ever heard of that book by chance? Well, Scott Adams is the cartoonist behind Dilbert, and he ran into a lot of serious problems from a political point of view. But that's really kind of his point was, behind the story was God blew himself up. And that's what we have as the universe. I think that kind of is in my understanding of pandeism. But like you said, that it seems like it's, he's just kind of leaving the world to its own, whereas panentheism and pantheism is not that way.
Yeah. Yeah, there's an ancient rabbinic doctrine called Tzimtzum, which is the like contraction of divinity. That God, if you imagine that God is infinite, right? Then you might ask, well, so then if God is infinite, then like where would you put a universe? Because
Right.
there isn't anything outside of God for God to put. So this idea of Tzimtzum is that God contracts God's self in order to make way for the universe. That there's so that's a little different of an image from these remnants or debris, but it's a kind of withdrawing. And then the idea becomes that it is incumbent then on humanity to do the work of God in the world. That God's not going to, swoop in and solve all of humanity's problems because God can't in one way or another.
Okay, very, very, very cool. I do want to kind of switch a little bit though to another pan that I really wanted to talk to you about because you mentioned it in a couple of your talks, and that's panpsychism. And I know that that's kind of getting a bit of pretty solid grounding in the scientific community. Tell us what that's all about, if you will.
Yeah, the idea of panpsychism is that, all right, look, we have these two things, right? We've got minds, consciousness, and we've got matter, bodies, things. And the perennial question is, how are these two things related to each other? Are they two things? Is mind a different thing from matter? Or is mind just matter that somehow, does some very special, fantastic things, right? Are our minds really just neurons? Is everything actually material? Panpsychism goes in the opposite way and says maybe what's going on is that there aren't two different things, mind and matter. But rather than reducing all of mind to matter, it kind of produces mind in matter and says maybe it's the case that everything partakes in some kind of consciousness. That bacteria have a kind of consciousness, that yeast has a kind of consciousness, and then you keep going, xylem and phloem, and the interactions of minerals and things have a kind of like protean sort of consciousness, such that consciousness suffuses the entire universe. And then, there are usually gradations of it in panpsychism, so that usually humanity has the most evolved form of consciousness, but it's not that humanity has a thing that nothing else has, right? That the whole universe participates in some kind of psychic life.
Okay, so it's like everything has some level of consciousness, whether it be very minor, like for instance, the pen I'm holding would be obviously significantly less conscious than
Not
myself
much
or
consciousness.
the yeah. I mean, yeah. So you pretty much everything's at least built with some consciousness in it, but not as developed as other things, perhaps.
Right,
Okay,
right.
interesting. Yeah, very interesting. And then, of course, you can get into the hierarchy situation there, right? Like, okay, well, I'm more conscious than, let's say, a dog, and then the dog is more conscious than, say, a tree, which then you can go all the way down, and then, okay, well, then where do you like? I think you're kind of falling back onto some of the points you've made about morality and ethics. Where do you get on, into that? It seems to be a very interesting take on that from panpsychist point of view.
Yeah, this is the thing. I really appreciate the effort to expand the range of, who counts, of what beings are important in the world, of who has agency, of what it is that matters. But in most accounts of panpsychism, we still do have this very hierarchical understanding of, who has the best kind of consciousness. So I think if you start from consciousness, which is a thing traditionally that humanity wants to say it has that nobody else has, and then very benevolently start extending that consciousness to other beings, you're always going to come up with humanity on top. But if you were to start from something else, right, and talk about like, I don't know, pan-navigationism and say like everything can navigate, right? To some extent, magnets navigate, bacteria navigate, yeast navigate. But you know who navigates really well? Whales,
Yeah.
dolphins, right? Like whales and dolphins would come out much better than humanity would, right? If you were to talk about pan-magnetism, if magnets were like, let's like organize the whole cosmos, then magnets, those kinds of rocks would come out on top, and humanity wouldn't be doing all that great. So there's it's an interesting way of looking at the world, but I don't think it tells us much about the nature of things. It tells us about the nature of what we care about, which is to say, again, consciousness. And then, again, there's a kind of generosity in extending that elsewhere, but it's still a very human-focused way of looking at the world. And clearly, if you asked a tiger to, organize the universe in terms of his understanding of it, it would look really different.
Yeah, it reminds me that I read a book that is, it was about the observation effect or the observer effect, and in it, the author was describing a time where he was fishing and he picked out the fish out of the water and he looked at it and had this epiphany that everything in the universe is all one thing and everything has consciousness, everything is the same basically, and I'm like and he was holding the fish and it dawned on me that, like, tell that to the fish, okay? I mean, this thing is going to die in about 30 seconds as he eventually threw it back in. But anyway, I don't know why that struck me as the same thing. But panpsychism, let me just real quickly shift a little bit. What is the difference between that and, say, animism?
Oh, so I actually think so. These are all funky terms. I actually think that animism can be a little more expansive a category than panpsychism, right? Panpsychism starts from an idea of human consciousness and then ascribes it in some sort of way to the rest of the material world. Animism is less specific. Animism is the idea. This is a very imperfect term. I just want to say that. We can talk about it later. Write to me. I'm happy to talk about it. It's an
Okay.
imperfect term, but in its broadest, least offensive sense, animism is the idea that everything that exists has animacy, has agency, and it's not necessarily consciousness. It's on a different scale. That things do things. That all everything in existence is in some way alive. And the reason that I think it's animism is interesting is that you can say that like a mountain is alive, sacred, ancestral, something like that, that a mountain is alive and a river is alive and a pig is alive. And these things are all alive in like really different ways. They live differently. You don't have to it seems to me, in the animist worldview, put them all on a kind of a continuum of who's alive more than whom. There's more room for qualitative difference and not just quantitative difference, right? In the panpsychist world, it's kind of quantitative. There's this much consciousness, that much consciousness, more and more and more consciousness. Whereas in the animist landscape, the landscape is alive in very different ways and in interdependent ways, right? That the rains are alive in interdependency with the rocks and the soil and the trees and the so it's a different framework for understanding a kind of living, vibrant universe.
Is animism related to or pretty much the same thing as, maybe different from, the notion of pan-vitalism? What about those two concepts together?
Yeah, I think they're kind of similar. I think, pan-vitalism is the way that um, European trained thinkers would name this idea. Animism is initially a term that like 18th and 19th century anthropologists gave to indigenous communities whom they didn't understand very well. But I think that reduced to their kernels of teaching. Some pan-vitalism and what people are currently calling animism are basically interchangeable categories.
Okay, fair enough. And I've come across an idea out there that I'm going to throw out, and just want to see what your thoughts are about it. I've only seen one other person who's ever really dealt with this issue. Is a guy out in Wisconsin who's really talking about that, who used to be talking about it, and I just haven't seen it anywhere else. So I'd love to hear what you think. And the concept is, again, another pan. It's pantheosis, the idea that everything isn't God necessarily, but everything is becoming God. What are your thoughts?
I love it. That's lovely. Yeah, theosis, the idea that everything becomes. Um, it okay. Pan Great. I would say that pantheosis takes seriously this idea that divinity might not be a thing, a noun. It might instead be a process, some kind of unfolding. So this would be a very processual idea that, and in that sense, if your divinity, if your pantheist divinity is a divinity that becomes, that's always in becoming. So Octavia Butler has this idea that God is change, God is evolution. A lot of contemporary panentheisms will say that God is always in process, God is always becoming. Then a really helpful way to name that and to make it clear that you don't mean that everything is God in like a stagnant way, like this is what God is and the tree is it or something like that, would be certainly to call it pantheosis, to make it clear that what God is, because God is like composed of and participated in by all these things, is always on the move and always moving and always changing and always becoming, would be more appropriately called pantheosis. Like absolutely, I would take that revision in a second.
Okay, great. Yeah, and you mentioned Octavia Butler. I believe that the gentleman I talked about just a minute ago in Wisconsin. I think he got to that concept through the readings of Octavia Butler and the idea that God is change, or that change is everything, or something along those lines. I came to it a totally different way, and reached that the ideas that he has as well, kind of from more of a I guess traditional scientific way, but I ran across that and I came up with kind of like these thoughts that felt similar to that, and wanted to know what you thought about it. So I'm really really pleased about that. Also, I know there's an idea that you've got panpsychism, right? That has consciousness is everything. It's in everything, and then panvitalism or animism, which everything's alive. So you have everything that's alive would then also be conscious, or it could also be conscious, but how about below that level? Can there be a theory that says that everything isn't necessarily alive and everything isn't necessarily conscious, but everything has a life force of some sort that could become into that status of living and then status of consciousness? And I'm throwing the question out at you totally unfairly because we have 1 minute left. And so maybe a short thought on that, and then I'm going to have to wrap it up, but then we can come back to it maybe another time.
Yeah, sure. There is certainly the idea that there is a life force that moves through everything. And I think that was initially the closer to the way of understanding animism, that like all things are somehow like inhabited by a force that lives through it. The more popular position now is to say, no, there's no distinction between the life force and the thing. The thing itself, the being itself is alive. But again, ultimately, I don't know that it really matters. Ultimately, the question is how what kind of stories do you tell like your kids, your students, people you would like to have some kind of influence on, that allow them to value the world
Yeah.
beyond themselves and the world beyond their families and the world beyond the things that they think that they ought to care about? How do you expand that circle of concern? If you expand the circle of concern by saying, "Oh my God, the fish is conscious," and throwing it back like, fine. Panpsychism is fine. It's working, right? It's working in
Right.
that particular.
It's working. Hopefully, the audience here, hopefully you guys enjoyed this show. Assuming that you did, and even if you didn't, go to go to our website. Tell us what you think about it. Love to have your comments there. That's exusthepodquest.com. Exusthepodquest.com. Go there. And then also come back to the YouTube. This is going to be on YouTube. Go right below. You see where I'm pointing down? That's where the comment section is. Let's have those comments. Love to have that. Also, like these videos. There's maybe more than one, maybe. We'll see. Maybe just one. But whatever it is, like it and subscribe to our show. That would be great. The more subscribers, the better. We would love to have as many as we can possibly get and more. So there we have it. We're going to wrap this up with Mary Jane Rubenstein. What a fantastic conversation. Absolutely loved it. Thank you again. Go to our website. Go to the YouTube. You guys go there, and we will be going ever forward.